Hello, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Hello, Caribbean. Hello, world. Thank you for joining us for another exciting edition of Page Turners Plus. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Elizabeth Nunez. She's the author of the last novel we did, Now Lila Knows. Elizabeth is a distinguished professor at Hunter College, City University of New York. She's the author of 10 novels and one memoir. She's been selected, some of her work has been selected by the New York Times as recommended novels. There is, in fact, a literary prize named for Elizabeth. So she has been laboring in the vineyard of literature, of Caribbean literature for a very, very long time. And we are extremely privileged to have her. Thank you so much for joining us, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be a guest on this important panel. So thank you very much.
Yes, and you're also no stranger to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You know these islands, and I know that you have family here.
I absolutely do.
So it's a special pleasure for us to have you. Now, let's just go straight into it. When we discussed Now Lila Knows, each of us appeared to have had a different idea of who your target audience was. Some of us thought you were primarily targeting an African American audience. Some thought you were primarily targeting a Caribbean audience. Some of us thought, well, perhaps it's Black immigrants to the United States who are your primary audience. And some of us thought you were trying to target white Americans who have very little contact with Black people. So you tell us, who did you have a primary audience in mind? And were we totally off the mark in all of our speculation?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the question about targeting is a publisher's question, is an agent's question. It should not be a writer's question. I am a novelist. I write fiction, not nonfiction. And as a fiction writer, I deal with a specific situation. I have characters moving around in a specific situation. And the reader can make contact with that specific situation. But basically, I'm talking about a human issue. And so if you ask me what my target audience is, it's everybody in the world. If you look at the epigraph to the novel, I cite two people. One of them is Ivy Wiesel, who is Jewish. The other one is Martin Luther King Jr., who is African American. But both of them are talking about the same thing. They're talking about that evil can only thrive when good men remain silent. That is what my novel is about. My novel is about injustice. And the question is, do we have a moral obligation to speak when we see an injustice? We can have 1,000 reasons why we would not get involved, as Lila does. The novel is called Now Lila Knows. Hopefully at the end of the novel, she realizes that the 1,001 reasons that she has, which are valid, may not be valid on a human level. Meaning that, do we as human beings have that obligation? A fiction writer operates differently from a nonfiction writer. A fiction writer presents you with a specific, as I said, a specific situation, and brings you into it. But the intent is not to stay in this specific situation. It is to see how this situation applies to anybody just as well. Elie Wiesel is not talking about me. He's talking about white Europeans who stayed silent when the Holocaust happened. Martin Luther King is not talking about specifically, I mean, he may be talking specifically about white Americans, but he's talking about everybody. On that question of targeting, this is the problem for the writer, and especially for a writer like me, meaning I'm Black, I'm an immigrant, I'm female. So it's a problem that the publisher has. I don't have that problem. That publisher needs to target my work. So what they're looking at is who's going to buy your work, Elizabeth? Because publishers are concerned with market. Who is their businesses? So that is not my question. And sometimes this infuriates my publisher that I am not paying that attention, but they're not doing their work. They have decided something. Let's take Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. I'm certainly not a white woman. I'm certainly not English. I certainly don't belong to the beginning of the 19th century. Yet that novel speaks to me. Publishers have no problem targeting that novel to every audience. But when they come to me, they say, well, Elizabeth, the only people who would be interested in your novel are Black people. They don't even say Caribbean people for the simple reason that they don't think there is financial benefit to them. So there is no financial benefit to them to target Caribbean audience. There's financial benefit to them to target African Americans because that audience is bigger. It's very frustrating for me, extremely frustrating for me, but that's it. So I hope I've answered your question.
You have, and actually, you've cleared up some questions we had concerning other authors, because we, for example, we covered Sherry Jones's How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, which was not marketed in the Caribbean. And in fact, we couldn't access it on Kindle in the Caribbean. So it caused us quite a bit of, bother trying to access that book when we wanted to cover it. And I think there was a similar issue with another novel. But at this point, I'm going to invite Francine in to ask any questions that interest her.
Okay, I'm gonna follow on to something that you said about that you're writing, you present a situation, you present an issue to the readers. And one of the issues that we picked up on in Now Lila Knows is the issue of distrust. And we felt that there was distrust between different groups of people. There was distrust between white Americans and African Americans, but there was also distrust between African Americans and Caribbean immigrants to the United States. What do you hope your readers will take from this aspect of the novel?
So one more time, I will thank you for your question. And one more time, I go back to the fact that the fiction writer is not a nonfiction writer. It's not a journalist. It's not somebody expounding on some specific thing and making an argument with a thesis and trying to prove it. That is not my role. My role is to take a slice of life, to give you a place, a time, and characters, and they bounce around with a problem. And so and then I'm being specific. So I deliberately chose a place. I don't know that college, I made it up. But I know that Vermont is the whitest state in New York, in America. So I specifically chose that state. I specifically chose a current situation where the police are just doing this to Black men. It doesn't matter whether they were educated or not. So, and actually, I chose something that has historical significance in a way, because that incident did in fact happen many, many years ago, where a Black man was giving CPR to a white woman. And when he put his mouth on hers, the police shot him, and it didn't get much traction. So once I choose a situation, I have to be realistic to that situation. And so, yes, I did not target African Americans or Caribbean people, but I know specifically that situation happens. But I also know that situation happens in any context where there is oppression and the oppressor tries to divide the people. So you can look in East Africa, and the same would apply. That distrust would happen between the Indians who are in East Africa and the Africans. You can go to Guyana, you can go to Trinidad, where I am. So in any situation where there is oppression, the oppressor attempts to divide the people. And so part of, I'll confess here, I did two things I always want to do in every novel I write is to remind people about the Middle Passage, no matter how it happens. And the second, if that is located in America, I want to remind immigrants, whether they are Africans, they are from the Caribbean or from Africa, I want to remind them of the debt that all immigrants owe to African Americans. And I want to say that 1964 was the Civil Rights Bill, and 1965 was just 1 year later. And it was the first time the Immigration Act was changed from the 1920s. And what was the change? Country of origin was struck down as a criteria for immigration. Country of origin, which is what opened the doors. And that is directly related to racism. It's directly related to civil rights. And if country of origin is struck down, then the quotas don't apply, which used to be there before. And so you have people from the Caribbean, you have people from Korea, from Japan, from India, all of them, every last one of them owes to the struggle that African Americans made. And if you don't believe it, just look at the dates, 1964, 1965. So yes, in that sense, I always feel that whatever novel I write, and I think I've done this in quite a few novels, find a way to have that conversation. So the question of distrust comes from immigrants thinking they are better. Of course, they come more prepared. They didn't have, I mean, right now I'm in Trinidad. I'm walking around and I'm seeing Black people all over me. I just took a plane from New York to Trinidad. The captain was a woman, Black. The co-pilot was a woman, Black. There were first, just on gender, it's gender. There were no men on that plane. Secondly, there were no white people on that plane. I was in the hands of a Black woman captain, a Black woman co-pilot, Black women attendants. Now you would say you're accustomed to that, but I was coming from New York. So I wasn't accustomed to that. In fact, I had called the attendant and I said, how long has this been happening? Right? So you leave a country like this and you go to America, you don't have that issue of someone telling you all the time that you are inferior, someone asking you to question how you look physically, someone having to tell you your intellect is less. You just forge ahead. And so I say the two things have to happen. African Americans have to be more aware of where Caribbean immigrants are coming from, and Caribbean immigrants have to be more aware of the sacrifices of African Americans. It's two things.
Kesawa, this is a good time for you to come in because I know you probably have a million questions to ask.
Funnily enough, I'll reduce it to one or two. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a real honor and a pleasure to have someone that's been so involved with the field of Caribbean literature for so long join us to have a conversation about their latest work. And I suppose just bouncing off what you just said about gender, really, I was wondering how you see the kind of state of Caribbean literature now, because I think from my vantage point, it seems like when we think about Caribbean literature, certainly in the UK context, often we think of classic writers and Caribbean literature as being a very male-dominated space. But in recent years, women have really come to the fore. We talked about Sherry Jones, and we mentioned we're going to do Angela Barry. There are so many great women writers, and they seem to really be leading something of a renaissance. Can I say? Would that be too deterministic? But there's this wave of Caribbean literature that they're enjoying so much, and I kind of wondered if you had any thoughts on that. If gender is the big difference now.
Thank you for that question. Of course, I'm going to say Renaissance, not the way you pronounce it. And we are constantly talking about Renaissance. I've been on this earth and in this business a very much longer time, I know, than you. So I have seen the waves of, we are in a Renaissance. So here's an analogy. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did the tree fall? Now, why does no one hear the tree fall? I'm bouncing that question back to you. I just want to give me at least two reasons. Why didn't no one hear when that tree fell?
I guess one would be that no one was listening out for a tree in the forest, or people were not in the forest to hear it, would be my two answers. Okay. So maybe the tree was falling very heavy, but you weren't listening for a tree sound.
So I'm going to do an analogous with Caribbean writers, and particularly Caribbean women writers. There are wonderful Caribbean writers. There are wonderful Caribbean, but no one's hearing them. No one's hearing them. And if I were to look at my career in phases, moving as a student, moving as a critic, moving as a teacher, first starting as a reader, I put together conferences. At this stage in my career, I am a literary activist as well as a writer. And I'm not blaming anyone, but I am just trying to get readers to understand that they have the power to have the voices of Caribbean writers heard, or they have the power to silence the voices of Caribbean writers. It is not enough to say I have written a book. It is not enough to self-publish a book. It is not enough to have a gathering. None of these work. The question is distribution. That is what the houses know. It is distribution. It's getting that book all over the place, as well as in foreign countries. It's getting that book to a market. And the answer is a very simple one. You have to buy the book. Because the publishers are not interested. They would sell Jell-O. At one point, they thought the only kind of books Black people would be interested in were body rippers, right? Sexy books, that kind of. That's what they thought Black people. So they started publishing those books, right? So then the more informed Black writers say, but no, we want books of worth, of substance. If you look at the 60s, what did they think? Well, that was coming off the heels of the civil rights movement. So they thought, we want protest books. So we're going to publish James Baldwin, and we are going to publish Richard Wright, and we are going to publish those books. Then they said that phase is over. Right? So my answer to you as an activist, which is where I see my role, I feel it's incumbent on me to get the message out to Caribbean readers that they have the power for us to hear when that tree fell in the forest. They have the power. And that power is only by buying the books. It is not by having a different publishing. And, they say, let's have our own press. That's not the answer, because the small press is going to run into the same problem, distribution. It is not the answer. The answer is to activate the reading audience. So people come and say to me, I love your book. I said, yeah, but did you buy my book? It's not that I want the money. I have a job. I don't need it, But if you buy my book, you're going to buy another Caribbean woman's book. You're going to do that because you're going to say, oh my God, Caribbean people write this?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up. Agree with you 100% there. Simply because I was in Barbados recently, and And I was with my big British accent and my British family. We were on holiday together. We went to some of the tourist spots, and they're selling all sorts of things from Barbados. And I'm like, Sherry Jones has had this really famous novel. Where's that among the things you're promoting about Barbados? Do you want me to buy the cup, and you want me to buy the T-shirt? But what about the literature that's being produced here that I know is awesome and internationally recognized? And I would never know that coming into this shop ever, you know.
But
I went
that's
to place
our
to
job.
place, and so I went and I asked them. I'd asked them when I went to the shop, "Do you have this book? Do you have this book? I've heard about this book from Barbados, set in Barbados. I'm on Barbados on holiday. I want to read it. Can I buy it here?" And they look, book. So I do think there's something to be said about the way that we think people are interested in what when they come to Barbados or anywhere. We all have stories to tell. Why would you think that Caribbean people don't have stories that you'd want to be interested in when you're
Yeah.
in the country? You've come
Yeah,
to
but
visit.
I want to make the jump. As I told you, I'm in this evolution of the time in my life. And I spent a lot of time blaming publishers. I spent a lot of time blaming bookstores. But I'm going to tell you, bookstore will sell your book if there's a market. Publisher will publish your book if there's a market. So what I'm saying to you, and I've been around Mulberry Bush a little too much. So you can't blame the bookstore, and you can't blame the publisher. You can't blame either of them. What you have to blame, what you have to do is to realize you have to have a market. Now, what you guys are doing right now is going to hit some people. And some bookstores would say, hey, I heard this panel about this writer. Maybe I should have that book. That's the only reason they're doing it. The only reason they're doing it is because you've done this, and they think maybe one or two people will want to buy the book. So we are spinning our top in mud. And I'm hoping that you guys are going to look at me as an elder saying this. We are spinning our top in mud by blaming the publisher or blaming the bookstore. They are in there to make money. That's what they're there for. And so we have to take another rule. And that's the rule you're doing right now. We have to do reviews, book reviews. We have to get newspapers to do that. We have to do podcasts. We have to do all that you have to do to gin up an interest, because the tree fell in the forest and they didn't hear it. So why should they have it in your bookstore?
And that leads me to our next question. Lila has an ex-boyfriend called Kenton.
Mhm.
And he's of the view that Lila's interest and commitment to Caribbean literature is an elitist waste of time. He tells her it doesn't matter what people feel, it matters what they do. When Lila responds to his accusation by saying that stories promote empathy. No, you've been speaking about the fact that what we need to do is generate interest in Caribbean literature so that Caribbean people will buy and read these books. How do you respond to a Kenton? How would you suggest that we respond to a Kenton? Because there are a lot of Kentons out there.
I think I responded to that specifically in the novel. It is when Lila read A Different Drummer. It is when she read that novel. That was the turning point. In other words, what the power of story. Story has more power to me than nonfiction. Why? Because story requires you to connect with a specific situation, a specific character. Story, Jesus Christ told stories, the oral traditions. Story is powerful, and it is powerful because we get involved in the plot and we want to know, and what happens next? And what happens next? And what happens to the person? Okay? So story has that immediacy and intimacy. But story allows catharsis. And that is what Lila said in the end. Story allows us to, the Aristotle catharsis of pity and fear, but it allows us to have sympathy for the character. It allows us to ask the questions you're asking in this novel. And it allows us to have fear. Would I do it? If I were in that situation, maybe Lila is right. I mean, what I just walk away. I don't get I'm going home next year. I don't have to get involved. So story asks, because story connects you to the characters, intimately to the characters, in a way nonfiction doesn't. Nonfiction is telling you something. A fiction writer does not tell you anything. A fiction writer is asking you to get into the lives of the characters, to empathize with the lives of the characters, and then to ask yourself the question, would you do that too? Do you understand her reasons? Do you agree with it? And so, to answer your question, Paula, what I did in that novel is to do a novel in a novel, in which the thing that makes the change, no matter what everybody else said, what made the change for Lila is reading a different drama, is reading a novel. And the novel created catharsis. So I'm not saying one is wrong or one is right. I mean, as far as Kenton was concerned, he goes to Africa and he does. But Lila is going to be changed, I hope. I hope she's not the same woman that she came in the beginning. I hope when she goes back to the Caribbean, she will act. And the thing that has caused her to act, as you know, she's finished with Robert. She does not agree with his point of view, that you stay out of things, that you don't see yourself in the same cause of Black people, which is a Caribbean problem, which is an American problem. I've got all these darn bloods in me, and the biggest blood you have is the one on your skin. That's the biggest blood. And that came from Africa. So it's causing Lila not to stay in the shadows. It's causing her to say, I have to identify with the cause of all Black people, no matter where they are. And Story did it. I think Story is, I mean, I have this struggle with, especially with my brothers who read these quick fix books, these good health books. I'm trying to do this with my son. Men tend to do that. They think story is feminine. And once they realize the power of story, then that's it.
Francine, would you like to come in here?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask a sort of a follow-up question, since we were talking about, what needs to happen in terms of getting books published in the Caribbean and the power of fiction. Is basically how was your book received? I'm more interested in how it was received in the Caribbean, but also how was it received in North America?
Well, I asked Paula that question directly. I said, how did you get my book? Was it my sister who showed you my book? Because my sister is in St. Vincent. She said, no. That was amazing to me. That was an amazing response. I don't know how my book got there. But Francine, I'm going to tell you something that is pretty sad and true, but it is true. White critics opened the doors for Black writers. White writers opened the doors for Black writers. And the answer is simple. They are the gatekeepers. They're already inside. The gate is open for them. And until we change that, we are going to be in this situation. So sometimes I talk to people and I say to them, use 10 fingers. Now I want you to name Black writers that you know. They could hardly use one hand. So how is my book received? The people who I have to say who support my books are African Americans. The Academy, more and more. This particular book, I don't know how it hit a nerve, but I'm getting invited. And I mean, this spring, coming up in April, I probably are traveling to about 4 or 5 places. Most of them are academies, most of them are universities, most of them is some professor who has backed the book and gotten their university to say, oh, ask Elizabeth Nunez. What does that do for me? It means a professor is going to teach my book. It means there are 20 students in the class. It means no professor just teaches a book one semester. They're going to teach it at least 4 semesters, 4 times 20. You understand? So a publisher is going to sit up. I'm going to be reading on Saturday, or Sunday or Saturday in Paper-Based, a bookstore in Trinidad. I don't know how many people are going to be there. Could be 5. I just did a reading at Alliance Française because my memoir was translated into French. It was a white woman. Got it?
Yeah, but isn't that a power dynamic though, Elizabeth? Why that's happening? That isn't that because that's where power.
That's what I said. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so
Okay.
I kind of moved to another place, Paula. This, just very quickly, this summer when I was reading in all kinds of places, but one of the places I read was in Vermont because the book is in Vermont. And they had me read in this cavernous place, which was packed with another writer. I walked in there and I know that place, those there, and they're not there to see me. The audience, all I could see was about 4 Black people or 4 people of color. All the other people are white. But it was my chance to present myself. And the bookstore, usually when I go to things like that, they line you up with the main event, and they sold all my books in a second. The lines, and they kept apologizing to me. Now, the guy who they were there for is a guy called Tom Pulata that I didn't know. But apparently his books have been made into movies with Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick and a whole bunch of people. So after we were finished, I said to him, I want to talk to you. I said, you are a gatekeeper. And I said to him this way, I said, do you know when I say racism is systemic, what do I mean? He didn't understand. I said, I mean, when racism is systemic, I mean, it permeates in every aspect of society, including books. And if you want to say you are not a racist, you have to do something to end it. So he looked at me in shock and he said, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do, Elizabeth? I said, open the gate for me. Obviously, what I read and how I talked appealed to these people. They didn't know me. They had not come to speak to me. It had appealed to them, so much so that they bought all the books. The bookseller figured, well, maybe 20 people would want to sell. And she sold all 20. She wished she had more. That was a question of a gate. I said, that is a question of what I was going to say, Keziwa. What I was saying to you, when you said the bookseller didn't have your book, they didn't think anybody would. So that's another aspect of my activism. And by the way, Paula, when I say use one hand to name the Black writers, every single one of those 5 that I'm going to give you have white godfathers. Every single one of them has a white person opening that door. And let me give you an example, which I'm telling tales out of school, and I know this is going to be broadcast, but that's okay. You know the book Between the World and Me? By whom?
Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
You know who his father is? I didn't know until I'm reading the book, trying to figure out who he is. He talks about his father being Paul Coates, and I'm not making the connection. Then I remembered that when I used to run the Black Writers Conference, I went to my notes. Paul Coates is the founder and publisher of Black Classic Press. And when I was doing the conference, Paul Coates has this small publishing press. And his cause, always with Black people, published by a small press, and he's struggling to this day to get it. Now, I'm going to ask you the question. His Between the World and Me is a small book. It sold millions of copies. I believe the last count I heard is that Ta-Nehisi Coates made $5 million. That was a year ago. If Ta-Nehisi Coates makes $5 million, the company makes 5 times that, right? Now you answer the question. It's not that his father is an editor. It is that his father founded and owns a publishing company. Understand what I'm saying about gatekeepers? Shall I give you one more piece of information?
Yes, we're waiting.
Ta-Nehisi Coates used to be, maybe still is, a senior writer at Atlantic Monthly. Do you get it?
Yeah, I knew he was a writer at Atlantic. That part I knew before.
Do you know who reads Atlantic Monthly? Do you know who runs it? Let's take Jamaica Kincaid. What's the connection? Got it? Don't get it? No. She was married to one of the Shawns, who is the son of the owner of the New Yorker magazine. Got it?
Yes, Girl was published in the New Yorker first, isn't that so? I think Girl was first published in the New Yorker.
Of course it would be. She's married to the son of the. So this is the phase of my life here, by saying that we have to be activists. We can't blame bookstores, we can't blame publishers, and I'm doing an add-on to it. And the add-on to it is to understand what we mean when we say racism is systemic. And you cannot tell me that you are a bestseller, a white bestseller, and you are saying to me, I'm not racist. I say to you, racism is systemic. You are racist because you darn well know the doors that you can get through that I can't get through. And you also know you have the power to open that door, at least crack it. Got it? So I like what they say in London. There's something that I saw in London in a protest march where somebody was carrying a placard that says, we are here because you were there. We can't let them forget that.
Yeah, it's that imperial connection. We don't forget it either.
Can't let them forget that. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I'm going to go slightly off-piste, I think, because it's been too long that I've stayed on piste. I really liked what you were saying about stories create empathy. And in my day job, I'm a historian and I teach Caribbean history. And I always encourage my students to read Caribbean novels. And I always encourage them to do so for a couple of reasons. And one of them is to kind of situate themselves in the world of the Caribbean as they try to learn the history, as opposed to just learn it as a side thing. But also for the reason that they then write reviews and they then post them on Goodreads, and it does generate those reviews you mentioned, and people buying the books, and giving them a long list of authors to choose from. Choose one of these books, anyone. It doesn't matter to me which one, but choose one of these historical fiction novels and read history as Caribbean people understand it, alongside the course that I teach. And I guess looking at your sort of bio very briefly, it struck me that perhaps you were there for a big historic moment in 1983 in June, when Maurice Bishop was around. I think he was at Medford Evers College. Where was you teaching there at the time?
I was.
And I wondered if you're at that. The video is on YouTube now of him giving the speech. I just wondered if you were there and if you could maybe speak into that moment as a writer. That was a very exciting time. I think Audre Lorde was around at that time.
Absolutely.
She was with you, and I just thought you must have really experienced. And I guess in the late 70s, it's that moment as well. Rosa Guy is writing and Toni Morris is editing.
I was very close to her.
Rosa Guy.
Yeah.
Rosa Guy is like one of my literary aunties, like The Friends, Edith Jackson. These are books that formed my childhood.
And Maya Angelou was very close to her.
And so I wondered if you can speak to that moment for us.
Well, I had Lila's problem, meaning that my consciousness wasn't raised. I was outside of it. Dick Gregory also came to my college. Dick Gregory made the impact on me more than any of these other people. And the reason I could just see him, this was I started teaching in university in 1972. Okay, you probably weren't even born. Okay, so he made a huge impact on me because I was still on the outside. You know, I'm an immigrant, I'm a foreigner. Listen, at Alliance Française on Saturday when I was talking, there was a man who said, well, you know, in Trinidad, we didn't have slavery. The man was around my age. And then he sort of worked it out. Well, but not, if we did, it wasn't for a long time and it didn't involve a lot of people. We were freed people. Of course, I took the occasion to help him out. But I was that man. So all these people you are mentioning, I am looking at them as writers because I want to be a writer. I'm not looking at them because Black writers tell a story, but they always, hopefully, will let you know the history. As I said to you, you shouldn't be able to read a novel by me without somebody talking about that middle passage, okay? So Dick Gregory said, at this time, he was at the height of his fame, he was making a lot of money and stuff like that. And he said, when the door was open for me and I stepped out, I stepped in so much blood, it was up to my nose. And I'm sitting down here seeing this man. What blood is he talking about? And that was the impact. That is the big thing that made me say, what blood he's talking about? And then I realized I had walked in there. You know, I thought I was so big and bad. You know, I had these degrees. I was going to teach at Medgavis College. I was this good teacher. What the heck? That's all I'm doing. I didn't stop to think that that college was named after somebody who was assassinated. I didn't stop to think that that's how I got my job. I didn't stop to think that's how I got my visa. So I don't know how I'm answering your question. I think I got myself turned around. I hope I'm coming close.
No, that's great because you answered it. You said it was Dick Gregory that had the most impact, and I guess
I'll answer it. Nobody made me do it. Okay, all that was happening there was that I was seeing these writers as writers. No, and that's great that you are a historian. So we need you. Nobody made me say, you can't get away with this, Elizabeth. Read the story with deeper intent. Know the history. You can't get away with it.
On that very powerful note, we have to wrap up. Now, you will hear Elizabeth reading from Now Lila Knows. It's pre-recorded. Enjoy it. The next time you see us, we'll be discussing Elizabeth Barry's new novel, The Drowned Forest. Thank you for
Paula,
watching.
do you mean Angela Barry's novel, The Drowned
Angela.
Forest?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's because I have an Elizabeth in front of me. Angela Barry's new novel, The Drowned Forest. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Elizabeth, as well.
Thank you so much. In this scene, Terence, one of the 3 remaining Black professors at that college, is speaking to Lila. So this is just a scene between the 2 of them. Terence was walking down the corridor when Lila spotted him. 2 male students flanked him, one of them speaking to him passionately, his hands punching the air. I didn't expect a visit from you, Terence said to Lila, unlocking his office door to let her in. Sit, sit. He pointed to a chair facing his desk. I shouldn't have talked that way to you before, saying this is not your fight, that I know racism doesn't only happen in America. What I meant was, he sat down and shoved away the pile of papers in front of him. But this is our country, Lila. We have to solve our problems. African Americans have to take the lead. There was an intensity in his voice that compelled Lila to make an admission she had not planned. I saw when that policeman killed Professor Brown, she said. In an instant, Terence's face darkened and rows of thin wavelets crossed his forehead. He pressed his hands on his desk and bent towards her, his shoulders raised, the muscles on his neck strained. Did you tell this to anyone? He asked. I told Robert, Lila said. Robert? My fiance, she said. Back home. So, are you going to report what you saw? Terence asked. I'm not sure it would help, Lila said, the police may not put too much worth in what I have to say. And why is that, Lila? I'm here only as a visitor, she said. And what, Lila? And I can't be sure of what you saw. Lila's fingers twitched nervously. If she reported what she believed she saw, she would have to go to court as a witness. She would need a lawyer, and she did not have money for that. And what would be the worth of her word against the word of an American officer of the law? She was here at the pleasure and goodwill of the U.S. government. It was the U.S. government that had granted Mayfield College permission to hire her. Her work permit could be yanked. She could be sent back home. She knew Terence was waiting for her answer. She looked down on her hands. She could not bear the glare from his eyes. But you did see Lila. His eyes were still fixed on her. You said you saw. I said I saw when it happened. I can't be sure I saw what happened. Terence threw back his head and laughed. It was a laugh without humor, a sad, accusatory laugh. A fine distinction, but a distinction all right, Lila, between when and what. But I don't blame you. Like I said, it's not your problem. You can go back to your sunny island. We live here. We have to face the racism here. I wanted you to know, Lila said softly. To know what? That Ron was innocent. Terence laughed again. My dear West Indian girl, you do not have to tell us that. We know. We have decades, hundreds of years of knowing. The police are always right. Black men like Ron are always wrong, always guilty in their eyes. He began gathering his books and papers on his desk. I have to go. Those students, he pointed to the door. I told them I would meet them in the library. He was dismissing her, but his condescension had irked her too. My dear West Indian girl, he let her leave fast, first standing back politely at his office door to let her pass through, and then he walked away in the opposite direction. He was angry with her. She could hear his footsteps clacking noisily down the hallway, and perhaps she had given him reason to be condescending. She was a coward. She had squirmed her way out of taking a stand with her simpering when and what. And yet, she had a legitimate excuse, sensible reasons for not committing herself to any statement that could implicate her as a witness, that could invalidate the police officer's claim, accuse him of lying. This was not her country. She could be deported.